The recording light blinked red, and Drell Sunoth pressed his thumb against the lens to wipe the dust away. He had been on Adara 6 for 11 days, and already the planet was trying to bury everything under a layer of brown, fine grit. The wind never stopped here. It whispered through the canyon walls of Hollow Basin like something alive, something warning them all to leave. Drell was Felisari. His people had soft gray fur, wide golden eyes, and a gift that most other species either envied or pitted. Felisari could feel emotions the way other beings felt heat or cold. Fear had a texture, anger had a color, and grief pressed down on the chest like a stone. Right now, standing inside the Coalition command post, Drell could feel everything falling apart. 5 species had sent soldiers to defend the colony on Adara 6. The Galactic Union had promised that the Brannick Dominion would not be allowed to burn another world. But promises were just words, and words did not stop artillery shells. The Torvin were the biggest fighters in the Coalition. Massive reptilians in thick plated armor, each one standing nearly 3 meters tall. They were built for war, but Drell could feel their fear leaking through the walls. The Torvin commander, a scarred veteran named Gorith, had been pacing for 2 hours. His tail kept hitting the table. Nobody told him to stop. The Asori were worse. They were the strategists, the ones who ran the numbers and built the battle plans. Tall, thin, insectoid beings with 4 arms and compound eyes that saw probabilities instead of possibilities. Their lead tactician, first analyst Shireen, had just finished her latest projection. She stood in the center of the room and said the words nobody wanted to hear. Survival probability for a defensive engagement stands at 6%. The room went cold. Gorith slammed his fist on the table. Then we retreat. We pull the civilians out, and we leave this rock to the Brannick. Shireen tilted her angular head. Evacuation would require 40 hours. The Brannick will reach the colony in 12. There is no retreat. Drell recorded it all. That was his job. The Galactic Press Network had sent him here to document the Coalition's defense of Adara 6, and he intended to capture every moment. Even if those moments tasted like ash and smelled like fear, the Felisari scouts were the first to break. 3 of them had gone nonverbal that morning, curled up in corners with their hands over their ears, overwhelmed by the emotional noise of thousands of terrified soldiers packed into a shrinking defensive line. Drell understood. He could feel it too. The fear was so thick it had weight. Then the communication officer, a young Asori with trembling hands, spoke up from his station. Incoming transmission from Galactic Union Command. Reinforcements are being deployed. The room shifted. Hope flickered like a candle in a storm. How many? Gorith demanded. The officer paused. Read the message again. Looked up. 400. Human soldiers. Earth's 9th Expeditionary Company. The silence that followed was heavier than the fear. Gorith let out a low, rumbling sound that Drell recognized as bitter laughter. 400 humans against 12,000 Brannick. He turned away from the table. The Union has sent us a funeral gift. Nobody argued with him. The Asori calculated the difference in numbers and said nothing. The Felisari scouts did not even look up. Drell had never seen humans in person before. He knew them by reputation, the way most species did. They came from a heavy gravity world with an unstable climate, a planet that tried to kill its own children with storms, quakes, floods, and predators. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy, not the fastest, not the most advanced, but they had spread across the stars faster than anyone expected, and they had a strange habit of showing up in places where they were not supposed to survive. He walked outside the command post and climbed a ridge overlooking the valley below. The wind pushed against his fur, and he raised his recording lens just in time. 3 dropships broke through the cloud cover. They came down fast and hard, cutting through the brown sky like stones thrown from orbit. They landed in the basin floor with heavy thuds that shook the ground under his feet. The engines whined and went silent. The ramps dropped, and the humans walked out. No banners. No were cries. No music or ceremony. Just rows of soldiers in dark gray armor stepping onto the dirt of a world most of them had never seen before. They moved in quiet, ordered lines, spreading out across the landing zone with the ease of people who had done this many times. Drell focused his lens on their faces. He expected to see what he always saw in soldiers arriving at a losing battle. Tight jaws, wide eyes, the stiff posture of beings trying very hard not to show how afraid they were. But that was not what he saw. Their faces were calm. Not blank, not frozen. Calm, like people arriving at a difficult job they had already accepted. A woman stepped off the lead dropship last. She was average height for a human, with dark hair pulled back tight and a scar running along her jawline. She looked at the basin, looked at the ridge where the Brannick army would come, and nodded once, as if the planet had told her something and she had understood. Commander Ava Brannigan had arrived. Drell lowered his lens. His fur was standing on end, and he did not know why. There was nothing threatening about what he had just seen. No reich, no bloodlust, no desperation. And that, he realized, was exactly what disturbed him. Drell found them in the lower basin as the last light of the day bled out behind the canyon walls. The human camp was not much to look at. No tall command tents. No glowing tactical displays projected into the air. Just rows of soldiers sitting on rocks and ammo crates, doing small, quiet things that made no sense to him. That a group near the eastern ridge was eating from silver pouches. They passed food between them, the way Felisari shared warmth during cold seasons, without asking, without keeping count. One soldier handed half of something brown and flat to another who had not asked for it. The second soldier nodded and took it. No words needed. Another group was checking weapons. Not frantically, slowly, the way a craftsman checks his tools before a long day of work. Click, slide, click. The sound were steady and even like a heartbeat. Drell approached with his recording lens held low, trying not to intrude. A few soldiers glanced at him. None of them stiffened or told him to leave. One woman with short red hair and freckles across her nose even smiled at him. "Press?" she asked. "War correspondent," Drell said. "Galactic Press Network." "Good," she said. "Someone should write this down." Her name was Corporal Dana Obeisai. She was the company medic, and she was kneeling beside a row of trauma kits laid out on a flat stone with the care of someone arranging precious things. Bandages, clotting agents, tiny vials of something she called adrenaline, tubes and needles, and sealed packets that smelled sharp and clean. Drell crouched beside her. "You are preparing for many wounded." "I am preparing for everyone," she said simply. "Not just ours." He blinked. "You carry supplies for other species?" She looked at him with brown eyes that were steady and warm. "I carry supplies for anyone with a heartbeat." He did not know what to say to that. So he moved on. He found Sergeant Rico Hallinan sitting alone near a narrow gap in the rocks that overlooked the basin floor. The man was running a sharpening stone along the edge of short blade. The sound was rhythmic, almost musical. Back and forth, back and forth. Drell sat beside him, keeping a respectful distance. "Do you need that blade for tomorrow?" Hallinan looked at the knife, then at Drell. He had pale eyes and a face that seemed built for silence. "No," he said. "I have a rifle. This is just habit." "Then why sharpen it?" Hallinan thought about it for a moment. "Because my hands need something to do. And if my hands are busy, my mind stays quiet." Drell tilted his head. "Are you not afraid?" The sergeant did not answer right away. He kept sharpening. The stone sang against the metal. Then he said, "Fear is like a bag on your back. You can put it down or you can carry it. But either way, you still have to walk." Drell recorded that. He did not yet understand it. But he would. He made his way to the command area, which was nothing more than a flat rock where Commander Brannigan had unrolled a paper map of the basin. Not a holographic display. Not a digital overlay. A paper map, marked with pencil lines and small handwritten notes. She looked up when he approached. "You are the Felisari correspondent, Drell Sunoff." She extended her hand. He had read about this human custom, so he took it. Her grip was firm, but not aggressive. "Is your family safe, Drell?" she asked. The question caught him completely off guard. He felt his ears flatten in confusion. "My family, back home, on your world. Are they somewhere safe?" "They are on Felis Prime, far from a war." She nodded. "Good. That is good." He stared at her. This woman was standing on a planet that would be a battlefield by morning. She was outnumbered 30 to 1, and she was asking about his family. "Commander," he said carefully, "the Asori have calculated your odds of survival at less than 6%. She smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that lived mostly in the eyes. "The Asori calculate everything. That is their gift and their curse." She folded the map. "We do not fight by percentages, Drell. Then what do you fight by?" She looked toward the ridge where the Brannick army waited in the dark. Thousands of campfires dotted the high ground like angry stars. The sound of war drums drifted faintly across the basin. "We fight by the person standing next to us," she said. "That is enough." The Brannick transmission came at midnight. It blasted through every communication channel at once, a deep, growling voice speaking in the common galactic tongue. "Coalition Force. You are surrounded. You are outnumbered. You will surrender your positions and your colony by dawn, or you will be destroyed completely. There will be no second warning." Drell felt the fear spike through the entire coalition camp like a blade. The Felisari scouts whimpered. The Torvin growled and shifted their weight. The Asori began quietly calculating escape vectors. He turned to look at the human camp. Commander Brannigan listened to the transmission with her arms folded. When it ended, she stood and looked at her company. 400 faces looked back at her in the dark. She said 5 words. "Gear up." Same as always. No speech. No fire in her voice. No grand declaration. Just 5 calm words, spoken the way someone might say, "Pass the salt" at a dinner table. The humans stood. They checked their gear. They tightened their straps. A few touched small objects hanging from their necks or tucked into their pockets. Drell could feel their emotions now, and what he felt made his chest tighten. They were afraid. Every single one of them, and not one of them hesitated. Drell turned off his recording lens and sat in the dark for a long time. The wind blew through the basin. The Brannick drums kept beating, and somewhere in the human camp, someone was humming a low, soft song that Drell did not recognize, but that made him want to weep for reasons he could not name. Dawn did not arrive gently on Adara 6. It cracked the sky open like a wound, red and orange bleeding across the horizon, painting the basin floor the color of rust. The wind had died during the night, and the silence it left behind was worse than any noise. Drell Sanaa stood on the Coalition's fortified ridge, his recording lens pressed to his eye. Below him, the basin stretched wide and flat, a natural bowl of rock and hard dirt surrounded on 3 sides by steep canyon walls. On the far ridge, nearly a kilometer away, the Brannick Dominion Army was assembling 12,000 soldiers. The number had been confirmed by Asori long-range scanners overnight, and it sat in the air like a death sentence. The Brannick stood in tight formations, row after row of armored warriors carrying pulse rifles and heavy blades. Their war beasts, massive 6-legged creatures with plated skulls and jaws that could crush stone, paced along the flanks, held in check by handlers with electrified chains. Warlord Gesh Tarek stood at the center of his army, visible even from this distance. He was enormous, even by Brannick standards. His armor was black and edged with the bones of enemies he had taken in personal combat. He had conquered 40 worlds. He had never retreated. He had never needed to. The Coalition forces were dug into the near ridge. Torvin infantry crouched behind stone barricades, their thick claws gripping weapons so tightly that Drell could see cracks forming in the handles. Asori officers stood behind them, whispering calculations into their communicators like prayers. Felisari scouts huddled in pairs, holding each other's hands, trying to share the emotional weight so that none of them carried it alone. Drell could feel all of it. The fear was a living thing now, pressing against his ribs, filling his throat. He had reported on 6 wars before this one. He had felt fear many times. But this was different. This was the fear of beings who knew the math and understood that the math said they would die. Then he heard the footsteps. They came from behind the Coalition line, from the lower camp where the humans had spent the night. A steady, even rhythm. Not running. Not marching with the hard, aggressive stomp that the Torvin used to build courage. Just walking. The sound of boots on packed dirt. Calm and unhurried. Drell turned his lens. 400 humans crested the ridge and passed through the Coalition's defensive line without stopping. They moved in a loose but organized formation, rifles held at their sides, not raised, not aimed. Their faces were visible. Some had smeared dark paint under their eyes to cut the glare of the rising sun. Some had tied small cloths around their wrists. One soldier had tucked a folded piece of paper into the strap of his helmet. Commander Brannigan walked to the front. Her helmet was clipped to her belt. Her dark hair caught the wind. Her scar looked deeper in the red morning light. She did not look back at the Coalition forces. She did not look up at the Brannick army. She looked straight ahead at the basin floor, and she walked. The Coalition soldiers watched them pass in stunned silence. A Torvin sergeant turned to Gorath with wide yellow eyes. "What are they doing?" Gorath did not answer. His massive jaw hung slightly open. First Analyst Shireen lowered her tactical display and tilted her head at an angle that Drell knew meant confusion in his sorry body language. "This is not a recognized military formation," she said to no one in particular. "This is not charge. This is not a flanking maneuver. They are simply walking." Drell followed them. He did not decide to. His legs moved on their own, carrying him down the ridge and along the edge of the basin, keeping pace from a distance. His lens never stopped recording. The humans walked down the slope and onto the flat basin floor. The open ground between the two armies. The killing field. They walked into it the way someone might walk into a room they had been in before. Without surprise. Without drama. With the calm acceptance of people who had already decided something important and were now simply following through. Drell kept his lens on Brannigan. Her breathing was steady. Her steps were even. She was afraid. Drell could feel it radiating from her like heat from a fire. She was deeply, powerfully afraid. And she kept walking. He swept his lens across the other soldiers. Hallinan walked 3 rows behind the commander, his pale eyes fixed on the terrain ahead. Obasai was in the middle of the formation, her medic bag bouncing gently against her hip with each step. A young soldier near the back, barely old enough to shave, had tears running silently down his cheeks. He did not wipe them. He did not stop walking. The Brannick army saw them coming. 12,000 soldiers watched 400 humans walk across an open basin toward them. No vehículos, no air support, no shield generators. Just people walking. The Brannick formation shifted. It was subtle, a slight ripple that moved through the front ranks like a wave. Soldiers adjusted their grips. War beasts lowered their heads and growled. Officers barked commands, but nobody fired. Warlord Tarek raised one massive hand and halted his artillery teams. His scouts had given him the numbers. 400. He had expected a charge, a desperate attack by a doomed force. He had expected screaming in rage. He had prepared for it. He had planned for it. That he had not planned for this. The humans kept walking. The distance between the two forces shrank. 800 meters. 600. 500. The wind picked up again, blowing dust across the basin in thin brown streams. Drell crouched behind a rock at the basin's edge and pressed his eye against his lens so hard it hurt. His hands were shaking. His heart was beating in his throat. Every Felisari instinct screamed at him that what he was seeing was impossible. Creatures facing death did not behave this way. They charged, or they fled, or they froze. They did not walk, but the humans walked. And the silence was so deep, so absolute, that Drell could hear his own blood moving through his veins. He could hear the click of a rifle strap, the soft crunch of a boot on gravel, the breath of 400 humans moving in unison across a field that was about to become a grave. He wrote one line in his notes that he would later read to the entire Galactic Union assembly. "I have seen armies charge in fury. I have seen armies flee in terror. I have never seen an army walk in silence. That silence was louder than any war cry I have ever heard." 400 meters. The Brannick army stared. The humans kept walking. And somewhere deep in his chest, in the place where his Felisari gift lived, Drell Sunoth felt something he had never felt from any species in any war he had ever covered. The Brannick were afraid. The first Brannick shell hit the ground 30 meters ahead of the human line. It tore a hole in the basin floor and threw a column of dirt and rock into the air that rained down on the front row of soldiers. Nobody screamed. Nobody broke formation. The humans split apart like water flowing around a stone, each squad peeling off to pre-marked positions across the terrain. That was when Drell understood what the quiet night had really been about. While the Coalition had argued and the Asori had calculated escape routes, and the Torvin had paced in circles, the humans had been studying the basin. Every rock, every dip in the ground, every shadow and ridge and fold in the earth that could provide cover. The calm evening of shared food and sharpened blades had not been idleness. It had been preparation so deep and so thorough that when the first shot came, 400 soldiers moved to their positions without a single spoken order. The Brannick artillery opened up in full. The basin floor erupted in fire and shattered stone. Dust clouds rolled across the field in thick brown waves. Through his lens, Drell could barely see, but what he caught between the blasts made his breath stop. The humans were not hiding. They were moving, small groups of 4 or 5, darting between cover with a coordination that looked almost rehearsed. One squad would draw fire by moving left. Another would use the distraction to advance right. A third would set up a position that covered both. It was not the brute force that the Torvin relied on. It was not the calculated distance that the Asori preferred. It was something else entirely. It was fluid, adaptive, and impossibly calm. Sergeant Hallinan led a 12-person squad along the base of the western canyon wall, hugging the shadows where the morning sun had not yet reached. The Brannick had placed 3 artillery cannons on a raised platform at the far end of the basin, and those cannons were tearing the field apart. Hallinan moved his people through gaps in the rock that should not have been wide enough for armored soldiers. They climbed. They crawled. They moved without sound. Drell only knew they had reached the platform because the cannons stopped firing. All 3 went silent within 30 seconds of each other. Later, the Coalition would learn that Hallinan's squad had disabled them with hand-placed charges, moving so quietly that the Brannick gun crews did not know they were there until the explosions went off beneath their feet on the basin floor. The main battle had become a storm. The Brannick infantry surged forward in a massive wave, expecting to wash over the human positions the way they had washed over every enemy on every world they had ever taken. They came in rows, thousands of armored bodies crashing across the dirt, roaring their war chants, their beasts howling beside them. The human line bent, the IT bent like a bow being drawn, curving inward at the center where the Brannick hit hardest. Soldiers fell. Positions were overrun. For a few terrible minutes, Drell was certain it was over. But the line did not break. At the center of the curve, Commander Brannigan stood behind a low stone wall and fired a rifle with the same steady rhythm Drell had heard in the soldiers checking their gear the night before. Click, fire, click, fire. A pulse round struck her left shoulder and spun her sideways. She hit the wall, pushed herself upright with her good arm, and kept firing. She did not raise her voice. She gave orders in the same calm tone she had used when she told her company to gear up. Second squad, cover right. Fourth squad, close the gap. Obeisai, we have wounded at marker 6. Corporal Obeisai was already running, not towards safety, toward the thickest part of the fighting, where the Brannick had pushed deepest into the human line. Drell tracked her through his lens and watched her slide behind a collapsed barricade where a massive shape lay crumpled in the dirt. IT was not a human. It was a Torvin. One of the reptilian soldiers had pushed forward from the Coalition ridge to join the fight and had taken a blast to the chest that had cracked his armor, plating open. He was twice Obeisai's size. He was bleeding green blood onto the brown dirt. He was dying. Obeisai did not hesitate. She pulled open her medic bag, found the Torvin-rated sealant patch she had packed the night before, the one Drell had watched her organize so carefully, and pressed it against the wound. The Torvin stared at her with huge yellow eyes, full of pain and confusion. "You are not my kind," he rasped. "You have a heartbeat," she said. "That makes you my kind." She dragged him to cover. He weighed 3 times what she did. She moved him anyway, pulling him across 10 meters of open ground while pulse rounds burned the air around her head. Drell did not understand how a body that small could move a body that large. He would later learn that humans had something called adrenaline, a chemical their bodies made during moments of extreme stress that temporarily pushed their muscles beyond normal limits. Other species had similar responses, but humans seemed to ride theirs like a wave, using it instead of being consumed by it. Word of what Obesai did spread through the coalition line faster than any order could travel. A Felisari scout saw it happen and sent the image empathically to every other Felisari in range. The feeling that came with it was not fear. It was something Drell had no word for in his language. It was the feeling of watching someone small carry someone big through fire because she refused to count the reasons why she should not. The Torvin saw it. They felt something stir in their blood that had been dormant since the fear had settled in days ago. One by one, the massive reptilian soldiers began moving forward from the coalition's fortified ridge. They did not charge. They walked. The way the humans had walked. The Isori saw the Torvin move and recalculated. The numbers had changed. Not by much, but enough. Coalition forces. First Analyst Shireen said into her communicator, her voice carrying something that sounded almost like wonder, advanced to support positions. The entire coalition line began to move, and down on the basin floor, in the smoke and dust and noise of battle that should have been a slaughter, the humans kept fighting. Not because they were winning, not because they were fearless, but because stopping was simply not something that occurred to them. Drell pressed his recording lens against his eye and whispered a single line into his notes. They did not inspire us with speeches. They inspired us by simply refusing to stop. By midday, the basin floor had become a place that Drell Sunoth would never be able to fully describe, no matter how many words he used. Smoke hung in the air like a gray ceiling. The ground was torn open in 100 places where artillery had landed. The smell of burned metal and scorched earth filled every breath. The humans had lost nearly a third of their number. 120 soldiers gone in the span of hours. Drell could feel the grief rolling through the surviving ranks like a slow tide, heavy and deep. But underneath it, holding it up the way a foundation holds up a building, there was something else. Something that had no name in the Felisari emotional language. It was not courage exactly. Courage was a sharp thing, a spark. This was steady. This was old. This was the feeling of people who had already accepted the worst and decided to keep going anyway. Warlord Tarek was not a fool. He had watched the morning's battle from his command position on the far ridge, and what he had seen had made him uneasy. His army outnumbered the humans 30-1. His warriors had better armor, heavier weapons, and the advantage of higher ground. And yet the humans were still fighting. Not retreating, not surrendering, not even slowing down. He made his decision. He sent the Fong Corps. The Fong Corps were the Brannick Dominion's elite soldiers. Selected from birth, trained in combat from the time they could walk, blooded in ritual duels before they were allowed to join the ranks. They wore black armor with the teeth of fallen enemies woven into their chest plates. They had fought on 37 worlds and had never, not once, lost an engagement point. 300 of them poured down the far ridge and into the basin like a dark river. They moved fast, faster than regular Brannick infantry, their long legs eating up the distance. They hit the human line at the narrowest point of the basin, where the canyon walls squeezed the battlefield into a corridor barely 200 meters wide. The impact was terrible. The human line buckled. Soldiers were thrown back by the force of the Fong Corps charge. Bodies hit the ground. Weapons were knocked away. For one awful moment, Drell was certain he was watching the end. Sergeant Hallinan was at the narrow point. He had 6 soldiers left from his original 12. They stood in the gap where the canyon walls came closest together, a passage barely wide enough for 20 people to stand side by side. The Fong Corps hit them like a hammer hitting a nail. Hallinan did not give ground. He planted his feet, raised his rifle, and fired into the mass of black armor pouring toward him. When his rifle ran dry, he drew his sidearm. When his sidearm was empty, he pulled the short blade from his belt, the one he had been sharpening the night before, the one he said he did not need. He needed it now. Drell watched through his lens as Hallinan fought hand-to-hand with Brannick warriors who were a full head taller than him and twice as heavy. He took a blade across his ribs. He took a blow to his leg that should have dropped him. He took a hit to his arm that left it hanging at an angle that made Drell's stomach turn. And he kept fighting. Not with rage, not with madness, with the same quiet, focused calm that seemed to live inside every human Drell had met on this world. 40 minutes. Hallinan and his 6 soldiers held that gap for 40 minutes against over 100 Fawn-Core warriors. When coalition reinforcements finally reached them, Hallinan was standing over the bodies of 2 fallen soldiers, bleeding from 3 wounds, still holding his blade. He looked up at the Torvin squad that had come to relieve him and said 4 words. "Took you long enough." The Torvin sergeant, a massive reptilian who had fought in a dozen campaigns, stared at the small human standing in a field of fallen enemies and said nothing. There was nothing to say. On the other side of the basin, Commander Brannigan was building something new. The coalition forces that had moved forward during the morning had reached the human positions, and for the first time since the battle began, all 5 species were fighting together. Not as separate armies sharing a battlefield, as one force. Brannigan placed the Torvin on the flanks. Their size and strength made them perfect for holding the edges of the line. She moved the Felisari scouts to elevated positions behind the main force, where their empathic abilities could sense Brannick movements before they happened. The Asori officers coordinated logistics, tracking ammunition and medical supplies with their natural talent for numbers and systems, and the humans held the center. They held it the way a spine holds a body upright. Everything connected to them. Everything flowed through them. They were not the biggest or the strongest part of the force, but they were the part that would not bend. Corporal Obeisai moved through the battlefield like a ghost. She appeared wherever the wounded were, sliding through gaps in the fighting that should not have existed, dragging soldiers to cover, sealing wounds, keeping hearts beating. By the end of the day, she would save 17 lives. 9 of them were not human. She would later say that she did not count species. She counted heartbeats. The Fawn-Core pushed again and again. Each time, the combined coalition line held. Each time, the Brannick pulled back with fewer soldiers than they had started with. The black armor that had never known defeat was scattered across the basin floor, mixed with the dirt and rock. Warlord Tarek stood on his ridge and watched his elite force stall against an enemy a fraction of their size. He had conquered worlds with less effort than this. He had broken armies that outnumbered his own, but he could not break this line. He could not break these people who refused to stop. He gave the order at sunset. 2 words that had never come from his mouth in his entire career. Pull back. The Brannick Dominion retreated. The drums stopped. The war beasts were pulled from the field. 12,000 soldiers turned and walked away from Hollow Basin under a sky that was the same color as the blood on the ground. The basin fell silent. Drell lowered his lens. His hands were numb. His body ached from crouching behind rocks for hours. His Felisari senses were raw and bruised from absorbing so much pain and fear and grief. He looked at the humans. They did not cheer. They did not raise their fists or shout or embrace each other in celebration. Some sat down where they stood, their legs giving out beneath them as the adrenaline finally faded. Some moved to the wounded and began helping Obeisai with the work that still needed doing. Some walked slowly to the places where their friends had fallen and stood there in silence that a young soldier near the eastern wall sat in the dirt and wept. Nobody told him to stop. Nobody looked away. A woman beside him put her hand on his shoulder and stayed there. Sergeant Hallinan sat down against the canyon wall and let the medics work on his wounds. His eyes were closed. His blade was still in his hand. When Drell approached him, Hallinan opened one eye and said, "Tell them what happened here." Drell nodded. "I will." He added one final line to his notes that evening, writing by the light of fires that burned where artillery had struck the earth. They did not celebrate their victory. They mourned what it cost. And somehow, that frightened me more than anything else. The Galactic Union Assembly Chamber was the largest enclosed space Drell Sanoth had ever entered. It stretched upward in a vast dome of white stone and glass, with tiers of seating rising in circles around a central platform. Representatives from over 200 species filled the seats, their bodies ranging from the tiny feathered frames of the Pelesi to the enormous stone-like forms of the Grundari. Light fell from the dome above in soft columns, and the air smelled faintly of the chemical neutralizers used to make the atmosphere breathable for everyone at once. Drell stood on the central platform. His gray fur was clean and brushed for the first time in weeks. His golden eyes swept across the assembly. His recording lens sat in his pocket. He would not need it today. Today, he was not recording. Today, he was testifying. The speaker of the assembly, an ancient Isori whose four arms moved slowly with age, introduced him. The chamber recognizes Drell Sunoth, HFY War correspondent, Galactic Press Network. He is here to deliver his official report on the siege of Hollow Basin, Adara 6. Drell took a breath. The chamber was silent. 200 species waited that he began. I was sent to Adara 6 to document a battle. What I documented instead was something that I believe this assembly needs to understand because it changes things. It changes what we think we know about strength and war and the species we share this galaxy with. He told them about the coalition, about the fear, about the Isori calculations and the Torvin pacing and the Felisari scouts going silent. He told them how the walls had begun to close and how every number pointed toward destruction. Then 400 humans arrived. He said that he told them about the dropships landing in the basin, about the boots hitting dirt, about the faces he had seen through his lens, calm and steady, as if the soldiers were arriving at a place they had always known they would go. I expected bravado, he said. I expected the posturing I had seen from a dozen warrior species across a dozen wars. Loud voices, pounding fists, declarations of glory. I found none of that. He told them about Brannigan asking about his family, about Hallinan sharpening a blade he did not need, about Obesai arranging trauma kits for species she had never treated before. A human medic packed supplies for Torvin soldiers she had never met, Drell said. When I asked her why, she told me she carried supplies for anyone with a heartbeat. She did not say human heartbeat. She said heartbeat. The chamber stirred. The Torvin delegation shifted in their seats. The Isori representatives tilted their heads. Drell told them about the walk, that he spoke slowly now, because this was the part that mattered most, the part that still woke him in the middle of the night on Felis Prime when the house was dark and quiet. At dawn, 400 humans walked through the Coalition's defensive line and onto the open basin floor. They did not charge. They did not run. They walked toward 12,000 Brannick soldiers, toward artillery and war beasts and an army that had never been defeated. He paused. The silence in the chamber was total. I have reported on 14 wars across 9 systems, he said. I have seen berserkers howl and charge into certain death. I have seen cowards throw down their weapons and run. I have seen heroes fight and fall while screaming the names of their gods. But I had never seen what I saw on that basin floor. I had never seen an army walk in silence toward its own destruction and do so with calm, open eyes. He told them about the battle, about the line that bent and did not break, about Brannigan taking a shot to the shoulder and giving orders in the same quiet voice, about Hallinan holding a gap with 6 soldiers for 40 minutes against 100 Foncore warriors, about Obesai dragging a Torvin 3 times her weight through open fire. She saved 17 lives that day, Drell said. 9 of them were not human. When asked about it afterward, she said she did not count species. She counted heartbeats. The Torvin ambassador closed his eyes. His massive hands rested on his knees, and his claws left marks in his own armor. Every species in this assembly has asked me the same question since Adara 6, Drell said. What makes humans dangerous? He looked across the tiers of faces. Compound eyes, scale brows, feathered crests, stone-like features, all watching him, all waiting. It is not their weapons. Their weapons are adequate, not superior. It is not their strength. A Torvin child is stronger than a human adult. It is not their technology. Half the species in this chamber have more advanced ships and tools. He folded his hands in front of him. His voice dropped lower, and the chamber leaned in to hear. It is this. Humans are afraid. The assembly murmured. Drell raised a hand. I am Felisari. I feel what others feel. And I stood on that basin floor and felt the emotions of 400 human soldiers walking toward an army that outnumbered them 30-1. I felt their fear. It was real. It was deep. It was overwhelming. Every single one of them was terrified. He let the silence hold for a moment, and not one of them stopped walking. The murmur died. The chamber went still. That is what makes humans dangerous. Not the absence of fear, the presence of it. They carry their fear with them the way one of their soldiers described it to me, like a bag on their back. They do not put it down. They do not pretend it is not there. They pick it up and they walk with it, and they do what needs to be done while the weight of it presses down on every step. Drell looked toward the far side of the chamber where the Brannick Dominion delegation sat. The ambassador, a tall Brannick in ceremonial armor, met his gaze. I saw humans walk calmly into a war they could not win. They did not flinch. They did not stop. They did not break. And when it was over, when the Brannick Dominion retreated for the first time in its history, the humans did not celebrate. They sat in the dirt beside their dead, and they wept. They mourned what victory had cost them. And somehow, that was the most frightening thing of all. He straightened his back and spoke his final words to every species listening. Every empire in this galaxy measures strength by size, by numbers, by firepower, by the willingness to destroy. Humans measure strength by something else, by the willingness to endure, by the ability to be afraid and move forward anyway, by the choice to carry others, even strangers, even aliens, even enemies, when the easier path would be to save only themselves. I do not know what to call that. I only know that I have seen it, and I will never forget it. And I believe that no force in this galaxy is prepared for a species that fights not because it feels nothing, but because it feels everything and refuses to look away. He stepped back from the platform. The assembly was silent for 11 seconds. Drell counted. In a chamber of 200 species, where someone was always talking or shifting or murmuring, 11 seconds of complete silence was something that had not happened in living memory. The Brannick ambassador stood. He looked at Drell. He looked at the assembly. Then he turned and walked out of the chamber without a word. His delegation followed. Within a year, no empire in the known galaxy willingly engaged human forces again. And in a small house on Felis Prime, Drell Sunoth kept a folded piece of paper in a frame on his wall. He had found it on the basin floor after the battle, fallen from the helmet strap of a soldier who had not survived. It was written in a human language he had since learned to read. It said, "Tell my family I walked the whole way."